Hello, and thanks for joining us on this week's film show. Coming up, she's still suspicious of smug marrieds, still prone to the odd scrape, and still navigating the troubled waters of romance. Bridget Jones is back, and this time she's got a baby. Lifting the lid on the inner workings of the EU. This is Not a Coup delivers some home truths about the Union and its relationship with its 28 member states. A new release, Mercenary, takes us from the islands of Polynesia to the southwest of France, following the journey of a young rugby player. For all of that, I'm joined by Lisa Nesselson, our film critic. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Olivia.
Now, we're starting off with a character who made a name for herself on the big screen as an anxious singleton. Bridget Jones is known for her diary, her calorific intake, for getting into some scrapes here and there, and now for her baby.
Ah, yes, Miss Jones and her dependent life form. I was stunned to read that the first two movies and the books they were based on were so popular that Bridget became the most given first name for baby girls in those years. And I guess if your parents are going to be inspired by a movie, better that than Frankenstein or Dracula, especially if you're a girl. Here are members of the cast situating their characters.
She's now the producer of a serious news program, but still hopelessly romantic and still vulnerable and perfectly imperfect.
I hadn't seen the films in that time. So I did some homework to see what Mark looks like and sounds like. I mean, it's not that complicated when you just have to clench your buttocks.
Actually, what I said before that about Bridget being the most popular name for girls, that was a specious factoid. Exactly the sort of alleged information Bridget's horrible, hip, young, new boss at the TV station where she works encourages. The name of the show is Hard News, and instead of hard-hitting journalism, said awful boss is in favor of stories like, will the world really end on Tuesday, and is your freezer giving you Alzheimer's? And I have to admit, I have no particular allegiance to these characters, and I was not looking forward to seeing the film, but I did enjoy it. And Emma Thompson helped write the script, and she has a small part as Bridget's gynecologist, and you can put me on record as strongly believing that Emma Thompson should be in all movies because she can do no wrong. So Bridget in this film has just turned 43. She is still single, and then in very short order, I think the space of a week, she has sex with two men, one American, one very, very English, and she becomes pregnant, and she has no idea which desirable fellow is the father. Let's take a look.
Oh, so this is Dad, I presume. So glad you could be here. Oh, this is a unique and wonderful moment.
Dr. Rawlings, I wonder if you could maybe do me a favor.
So this is Dad, I presume. Pleased to meet you. I'm so glad you could be here. This is a unique and wonderful moment. Before we start, would you like to know the sex?
Maybe we should be prepared.
You know, I'm not sure.
It's a boy.
Oh.
A boy.
A boy.
Boy.
It's our boy.
Boy.
Oh, my boy.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but most 43-year-old women who are a bit flawed, but certainly ordinary, don't have these two very attractive and I think wealthy men vying for them.
So true. Then again, this is a major motion picture directed by a woman, and that doesn't happen that often in real life either. While the story centers on Bridget's pregnancy and conveys the general idea that making babies is good, it doesn't pretend that childbirth is pleasant, and there's a nice feminist hum under all of these proceedings. The lawyer that Colin Firth plays, Mark Darcy, defends a group of women modeled on Pussy Riot, and I'm going to try and say this with a straight face. Their name is Punani. The use of pre-existing songs as underlining and sledgehammering sort of got on my nerves, but musical shorthand can be fun. And there are a lot of euphemisms for a man parking his garage parking his car in a woman's garage. I messed that up. But they also frequently use that word that we can't say on television. Anyway, I like this way more than I expected.
Okay, some irreverent fun from Bridget Jones' baby then. Now, that was shown at the Dinard Festival of British Films in Brittany. That's on France's Emerald Coast. It's the 27th time for that festival. It's an Anglophile event. What was going on this year?
What wasn't going on? Sing Street, a Dublin set comedy with music that takes place in the mid-1980s, won 4 out of 4 prizes. I think it's safe to say it's a very good, crowd-pleasing film, and it didn't win just because the other 5 films in competition were bad, because they weren't. I saw a film, a brand new one that you should be on the look out for. It's called The Hippopotamus, adapted from the novel by Stephen Fry about a permanently cranky alcoholic poet hired by the daughter of an ex-girlfriend to investigate the possible healing powers of a teenaged boy. Versus, an excellent documentary about Ken Loach, is full of insights about the lifelong socialist and two-time Palme d'Or winner who turned 80 this year, and it was followed by an enlightening panel discussion about what the woman from the British Film Institute called the vote, insofar as Brexit has not actually taken place yet. So let's take a look at a moment from Versus.
It fundamentally changed how I approach acting. It becomes all emotion and not intellect.
He actually makes you believe that you're that person.
The point is that Ken will not be deterred.
What they call intractable, what they call unchanging, is what makes him be that powerful. And it's a wonderful thing to see such quiet power.
Now, you mentioned the recent referendum on the UK's eventual exit from the EU. How do you think that will affect the UK film industry?
Well, the atmosphere at the festival was absolutely surreal because nobody attending from the UK actually wanted to leave or voted to do so. In the creative professions, according to Rebecca O'Brien, who is Ken Loach's longtime producer, a full 97% of professionals apparently voted to remain. And she was convened for a panel. A government minister, came in, and he said, okay, we don't have a plan for Brexit because actually we didn't think it would pass. So what do you people think? So they were in the situation of being people who absolutely did not want this to happen, being asked for their opinions how to bring about that very thing. The woman from the British Film Institute believes it won't be that dire because there are already pan-European treaties in place that will sort of cover film production. But one of the problems will be the free circulation of people, and you need people to make movies.
And often very international projects indeed. Now, speaking of all things European, our next film tackles that very issue, or that very union, in fact. This week is a new release, a documentary from a Greek director called This Is Not a Coup. Is that an ironic title?
You guessed it. Unless you're doing the overthrowing, more often than not, ordinary people tend to think that a coup is a bad thing. And it sounds undemocratic, and we all like to think that we have some control over our own lives. Well, I went to a press screening of this film not knowing anything about it or the director, and I found myself dazzled by the way it challenged my personal understanding of these issues. The Eurozone, the Euro, the European Union. Aris Stefanu has been called the Michael Moore of Greece, and that's high and deserved praise. Let's take a look.
I do not consider myself as one of the founders of the Monetary Union, because it simply would not be true.
The way in which the euro was constructed was entirely by bankers.
I would not use the word coup. I would call it the way the system works.
Now, in the spirit of these austerity times, I believe the film was crowdfunded, and that's quite impressive. It looks pretty glossy for a low budget of, endeavor.
Yes, it's exceedingly professional looking, and it is a pleasure to watch, except for what it's actually saying. I was asked whether the film is perhaps biased because the director is himself Greek, and perhaps you've heard that joke about balanced journalism. That's where you give 2 minutes to Hitler and then 2 minutes to a Jewish person. Yes, the director is Greek, but he approaches this as a European and indeed planetary story. The interviewees are so high up the food chain, former heads of state, internationally known financial analysts. What they're saying is so damning that I walked out thinking, well, maybe the EU isn't that good an idea. And I have to say, I was heavily influenced by my late landlady, who was born in 1905, lived to be 102, so had lived through World War I and World War II, and was very, very strong in her belief that the European Union was essential. There is so much information in this film that I'm planning to see it again, but the basic theme is this. The European Central Bank, headquartered in Frankfurt, is a bullying behemoth that cannot be reined in, and an anti-government and anti-democratic ideology can be said to be deeply embedded limited in the EU, and the Maastricht Treaty apparently cannot be amended, so we're sort of stuck with this. Henry Kissinger asked 40 years ago, if I want to call Europe, who do I call? So to see this film, please go to the San André des Arts Cinema, which is a model of art houses, and they cannot be bullied. They will show the movies they want to show, and they're showing this one for at least a month under their Découverte series, which is movies that they have personally discovered and wish to promote.
Certainly sounds like a damning critic of the structure itself of the EU. Now, we're moving to a French film that premiered in Cannes, and it comes to us by way of the South Pacific. It's called Mercenary, and it mixes some quite unusual themes.
That it does. There have been other films centered on the game of rugby, but I'm pretty sure this is the only one about a promising young 19-year-old athlete recruited from New Caledonia and brought to the French mainland, a mere 10,000 miles away, under what turn out to be false pretenses. Writer-director Sasha Wolf gets fine performances out of a primarily non-professional cast as he explores what it's like for people of Polynesia who may be French citizens but are inevitably seen as exotic outsiders. So our protagonist, Son, is of the stocky Wallisian build. They're a minority on the island, and he looks like a tattooed refrigerator. And he may be French, but he could be mistaken for a Maori who, say, had taken a wrong turn. So when he arrives in France, the coach of the team he's supposed to play for takes one look at him and says, no, you won't do, and says you should get back on the plane, but that's not an option. So what does he do? He's stuck in France. He makes his way to Agen in southwest France, where a fellow islander's cousin has some rugby connections, and he goes from a hog butchering and grass skirt environment in the sunshine to the rigors of training with a club where he is hazed, and he is obliged to start doping. He also gets a job at night as a bouncer and takes up with a local woman. So the menacing talent scout demands to be reimbursed for his plane ticket. The rugby club has problems. Son is worried about his younger brother, who begged to come with him, who he's left behind with his violent father. And one of the film's most interesting aspects, I think, is the way in which church-going Catholicism coexists, absolutely coexists, with pagan-style rituals governing revenge and forgiveness. And as you're about to see with his curvy lips, broad torso, and tree-trunk thighs, one Toki Piloko is a riveting physical presence as Son.
Well, it's certainly a glimpse into another world. We'll take a look at that in just a second. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us this week. We'll leave you with a clip of Mercenary. Remember, you can also watch our shows on our website, and you can keep up with Encore on our social media channels. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Combien tu pèses? 120. Abraham, ton pilier de 140 kilos là, qui en a perdu 20 dans l'avion, en tongs, en short, qu'est-ce que tu veux que j'en fasse? Je lui prends un billet retour que tu vas me rembourser dans la semaine, où tu auras affaire à mes avocats, et il repart dans 4 heures. J'en ai assez de tes conneries là. Merci. Tiens mon gars, désolé. Bon retour.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.